Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week it's Pentecost, and one of the things that happened at Pentecost with the coming of the Holy Spirit was people were able to speak in different languages. And so I've been thinking about language and how we use language, and particularly how we use language in the Church of England and in the rural church. So what does it mean for us to use language? What are the things sometimes that we use in a church setting that no one ever uses in other aspects of life? And now we as Anglicans often talk about things being on a first Sunday, a second Sunday, a third Sunday, a fourth Sunday, and then a few times a year we get a fifth Sunday. And I was trying to talk to someone about this when we were trying to move a service from a third Sunday to a second Sunday for a particular reason that we needed to do a swap round. And he was like, but people will be confused. People won't know because it's normally on a third Sunday and now it's on a second Sunday. And like, the people who come to this particular thing don't know that anything about second Sundays or third Sundays. They don't live their life like that at all. We'll tell them the date it's going to be on. They'll put their date in their diary, or they won't, and we'll send them a reminder, and then they'll come. They won't mind if it's a second Sunday or third Sunday. It will be almost meaningless to them. So I think that's a really important thing for us to think about when we're inviting people in to join things with our church community, that maybe they are not part of our church community. They won't have a thinking about first, second, third, fourth, fifth Sundays in their heads at all. And then there are even more difficult words. I mean, Eucharisto, a Eucharist is a kind of a Greek word, and rogation tide. Trying to explain what rogation tide is something to think about Latin for. And then Lammas tide, even I'm not exactly sure what Lammas tide is. But these are things which we use, language which we use in our church settings, in our church communities, which is quite alien, even though technically it's in English. It's quite alien to those who are not in a church community. So it's really important for us to think, if I'm advertising something using these words, if I'm talking to somebody about these words, somebody who's not part of our Anglican speak, how can I explain to them, how can I make it clearer what's actually happening without using this jargon that's become embedded in our Anglican churchiness in England. This week's thought for the week is about Pentecost. So it's the story of Pentecost. It's in Acts 2. So the disciples are waiting in a room. There's more than just and now 12 of them again. They're waiting in a room, they're praying, they're doing what Jesus said to do after the ascension. So they're really waiting, they're praying, they're wondering what's going to happen, and then there's this mysterious wind comes into the room. There's signs of tongues of flame above their heads. They feel that they're being blessed, and then all of a sudden they find that they can speak in different languages, and they go out into the street, and it's very busy in Jerusalem at that time because there's a big festival. There's people from all over the world. If you want to give someone a really hard reading, you can give them a reading about where all the people in Pentecost have come from, the people in the streets, who hear the disciples then speaking in their own language, and then some people say, well, they're drunk, and then Peter, not known for his speech giving, stands up and makes a speech about Jesus. And so we see how the Holy Spirit being in the Christians, who don't know that they're called that yet, actually how it transforms their lives. It makes them able to speak, and in particular it makes them be able to speak in the home languages of other people who are there, who are listening to them. And I'm sure after 20 years I've spoken about this before, but it's the languages that have really stuck with me this week, that the first thing that the church does is to be able to speak to each person in their own language, in their own way of thinking about it. And I always go on about this. I think it's a really important theological point that we do not ask people to learn a different language in order to become a Christian, and this is the very beginning of that theology. The first thing that the Holy Spirit does is it makes people be able to hear the story of God in their own language, whatever that language is for them. And this is such a big challenge. Language changes all the time. It modifies, it becomes different. I mean, every now and then my children, even though they're in their kind of early 20s, say something to me and I have to go and look up what it means in Urban Dictionary, and sometimes that's more revealing than others. I mean, who knew what Riz was amongst Generation X a few years ago? Riz, if you want to know, is a shortening of charisma, and Tom Holland controversially said that he didn't think he had much Riz. That's Tom Holland, Spider-Man, not Tom Holland the historian. And also things like, it took me a while to learn what yeet meant, when people, my children would say, oh, I'll just yeet it over here or I'll yeet it over there. What it just means chuck it, really. But language changes all the time, and the way that people understand words changes all the time. And I just think it's really important for us theologically that we are not putting an educational requirement in as access for people to be able to become Christians. That we don't even need people to be able to read to become Christians, and people were Christians without being able to read for years and years and years, and yet actually over the past sort of 150, 200 years, reading has become a really important part of being a Christian. Actually being literate, that comes all alongside the Enlightenment. So what do we do in our churches, which is the same language as people understand? Do we use language which is different for people that they don't understand what's going on, because the language that we use is not language which they understand culturally? And that's the real importance of it, isn't it? How do people understand what we're telling them about Jesus if they don't actually understand what we're saying, because the words are too alien for them, not part of their culture, not a language that they use? Even words like salvation and sin, and what does that mean? And there are all sorts of words which people don't use in the language that they have now, that are important for us to understand. We need to find ways of trying to explain what we mean without necessarily just using this coded language which we have grown up with in the church. I'm not saying that it is appropriate for someone my age to be all hip and trendy and using the words that sometimes I have to look up, because my young people are using them. But it is important to be authentic and to explain to people about God's story in a way that they understand, in the words and language that they understand, because that was one of the most important things about Pentecost, that people were understanding in their own language what was happening. The Dibley moment for the week this week is about using Bible translations, in particular problems with using the King James version of the Bible. So it's a very old translation, and you know, sometimes people read from it and they're really keen to read from it, and sometimes it makes just no sense at all. There are 9 occasions in the King James version of the Bible where it talks about unicorns. For example, in Job 39 verse 10, "Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee?" Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Honestly, I mean, yeah, if you're going to use the King James Version, make sure that the translation and the passage bit that you're reading still makes sense to people. I mean, unicorns? Really? Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week where you can all talk to the people in your community about the story of God in a way that they can understand. you.